Hello and welcome to the 20th episode of Guido Talks, where we review the last week in politics, in stories, in gossip on the Guido Talks website. And what a week it has been. We've had some properly big stories really cut through this week. So let's dive right in with where everything started on Monday. And that was the publication of SAGE documents from September, which show that Scientific Advisory Committee on Emergencies advised the government as one of 5 options to go for what's called a circuit breaker lockdown. Now, this would be a time-limited lockdown of much more of a greater severity than anything that we've seen since the initial lockdown. And the government chose to not opt for that and took some other recommendations instead. Now, the Labour Party's made a lot of hay out of that this week. How have they done that, Paul?
They decided to call for, Starmer decided to call for a circuit breaker. He had a 5 p.m. press conference on Tuesday. We got wind of it about half an hour earlier and led with that exclusive, which triggered a load of people. He, I think, was pushed into the whole decision because he was getting a lot of criticism from his left-wing flank in particular that he wasn't opposing the government. And now he had an evidence-based, i.e. the evidence of SAGE calling for it, opportunity to get some differentiation between him and the government. It's a risky strategy for him. It could backfire. Boris has dug in. I think we had a more spirited PMQs for once, where Boris firmly rejected a national lockdown. Now, we're going to see a lot of regional lockdowns. London's been announced today. But the idea of having a time-limited circuit breaker lockdown, well, the last lockdown was supposed to be for 3 weeks and ended up for 3 months. I don't think the economy could handle it. I think people understand that. But surprisingly, when polled, people say they prefer a lockdown. So it's a bit of discordance between what you think people want and what most people in the private sector seem to want and what people tell pollsters.
Well, I think there is that key difference there. When the question is a 2-week lockdown so everything can open up again, that's a very attractive prospect. I think I'd want that, okay, fine, we'll sacrifice 2 weeks and then we can all get back to normal. The fact is that that's simply not what would happen. 2 weeks is nowhere near long enough, clearly, to stop a rising number of cases, hospitalizations and deaths because of the 3-week lag that we know that this disease has at the very least. So, of course, it would be at the very least 3 weeks, most probably higher, because there's a lag between getting cases and hospitalizations, and then a further lag to deaths. So it would be really months until the number of deaths started to go down again. And at what position? How could any government sort of look down the barrel of a camera and say, right, we're lifting this lockdown as deaths are continuing to rise? I think it's clear that this just wouldn't work. But finally, you're right. The Labour Party has a different policy for the first time in 7 months. They actually have put their flag in the sand. And that made for very interesting PMQs. Kaugi, can you talk us through that?
Yeah, as part of this PMQs that was far better spectacle than usual, Sakir claims that all 10 local council leaders in Manchester had signed a declaration backing his call for a circuit breaker lockdown. And when you went and looked at this statement, it was immediately obvious that that wasn't the case, because it actually said that some of the local leaders believe that if cases continue to rise and if the stage 3 lockdown didn't work, then that would have to be the result. But it was very clear that not all of them were unanimous. And so I gave the Bolton Tory council leader a call, and he was absolutely furious that Starmer had, clearly, this is a guy who is director of public prosecutions and at the very least often has an eye for detail, and it completely claims the opposite of what the leader of Bolton Council believed. And he demanded Starmer went back and retracted it. He didn't. There was a point of order where an MP tried to get the record corrected, and Starmer has stayed pretty tight-lipped, and the Tories were not happy.
Do you think that he dropped the ball there, that he simply was poorly briefed or didn't know what was going on? Or do you think it's something slightly more mendacious, that he deliberately knew that what he said was untruthful, but he said it anyway?
There was a comment from Starmer's people that the Bolton mayor, or leader of the council rather, hadn't signed off or hadn't rejected something that was signed off. So they were kind of inferring, incorrectly as it turned out, that he took the position that he didn't really take.
Obviously, you can't accuse a member of lying in the House. So everyone was being very tiptoeing around it. But I think, let's put it this way, the Bolton leader of the council, the Tory Bolton leader, would certainly say that it was an absolutely disgraceful misrepresenting of his personal views. And
Yes,
that's as far as they were willing to go.
He didn't hold back his words of criticism for Keir Starmer, who he demanded, of course, come back to the House and apologise. But that wasn't the only angry politician from Bolton that we saw this week. Calgie, who else had a little bit of an outburst?
Goodness me, yes, we had a Bolton Tory MP, Chris Green, resign as a PPS, the most junior ministerial rung you can imagine, over the government's implementation of lockdown. This is the second PPS role that Chris Green has resigned over. The consensus is he won't be getting a third. And it coincided also with the PM's 1922 Zoom call. So whilst it was an event, it was immediately drowned out, and it was so low-key that it didn't really have any effect, but he wasn't very happy.
It was a good excuse, however, for us to get out our recently created list of PPSs, or as we've titled it, the Government Big Hitters List. Now, that's a little bit sarcastic. I'm not sure if anyone could quite tell that. But no, so there isn't any sort of public database of which MP is PPS to which minister or whatever. So we collated that. Was it last week or was it the week before? And suddenly
I think it was the week before then. But it's a very useful database, and also readers should bear in mind that because it's the first rung, an awful lot of 2019 intake MPs are being promoted, much to the consternation of the 2017 intake MPs who feel they're being overlooked, and even further to the consternation of, shall we put it, white, straight male MPs who feel that various characteristics are being bumped up the rungs faster than they otherwise might be.
Right. Well, all of these elements of consternation, these outbursts, these resignations were at the start of the week, and it felt like everything was building up to something. And that something dropped on Thursday, which was, of course, that finally it was announced that London was going to be moving up into tier 2 of the lockdown. Not just London, but also Essex and a couple of other places as well. But obviously, the largest city in the country, a city with a population larger than Scotland, larger than Wales, has now been put into a much higher degree of restriction than it has seen for months and months. And this is going to come into effect on midnight at Friday, or 1 minute past midnight, just on Saturday morning.
Have they said how long this is going to be for?
It is open-ended. This is one of the things that Sadiq Khan has been sort of challenging the government on, because there is a level at which a city or a region enters tier 2, but there hasn't yet been agreed a level of prevalence of coronavirus whereby a region can leave tier 2. So that hasn't yet been agreed, but I think a lot of local authority leaders are very much pushing for that to be agreed and that to be there as a standard and something to aim for.
Because I'm doing this Zoom from Lockdown Ireland, where we just had new restrictions which don't allow you to go into anyone else's house unless it's urgent or exceptional, or you're emergency worker, or the usual kind of medical reasons. And this is for a fixed term. It's for 4 weeks.
It is interesting, actually, if you look across in France, just on Thursday, they instituted a new rule of 6, which they hadn't had up until this week. It looks like basically lots of European countries are following exactly the same course, doing very similar measures. But it is also interesting to note that different populations are giving different approval ratings to their different governments, even though a lot of them are doing basically the same thing.
Of course, Macron also praised UK track and trace, as well as copying the rule of six. So clearly, by European standards, the PM isn't doing everything wrong. But we got wind of this on Wednesday afternoon, didn't we?
That's right.
Going to go into lockdown.
I was getting a couple of messages that there were some London MPs who were in discussions with Number 10, and we spoke with some MPs, some of whom didn't really know. Some knew that there was a meeting that would go on the Thursday, but didn't think that this meeting would be anything extraordinary. But then there were some other sources that we spoke to who were really quite confident. We ended up not running anything on the site because we couldn't be absolutely sure, and perhaps we should have lent into saying that there is this rumour going round. But of course, we don't want to put out outright fabrications. So what was
certainly not clear was whether it was going to be borough by borough, and there was still a lot of lobbying going on, especially from Tory MPs. If you think who are out up in the sticks in the northeast, or down in Carshalton or Richmond or Wembley, not Wembley, I don't know, London, but there's a lot of anger, an awful lot of anger.
If you look at the London Corona map, there's a very clear line along the Thames where south of London isn't as much of a hotspot as North London. So I wonder if they could have at least
because there's no transport links in the south. I mean, it's that's why it stops at Elephant and Castle and doesn't go any further. And even with that, the south is still a less appealing place to live and work and socialise than the hotspot north.
Dare you. As a proud resident of South London, I take great offence at that. I think it's simply because the people of South London are sticking to the rules better. No, I don't know. But there is a funny thing, though, isn't it? The highest R rate is in Scotland, which is furthest north. The worst hit areas in the UK are the highest, the sort of furthest north. And the further south you go, there seems to be the less corona you get. It's an interesting
coronavirus struggles with the balmy warmth that we've been enjoying down south all this time.
Literally basking. Yeah.
Of course, that applies to Ireland as well, because Northern Ireland has an R rating and an incidence level a multiple of the Republic, and it's a big issue over here in Ireland. And in the border counties, they are introducing tougher measures, and they're blaming it on people coming across the border, going across the Irish Republicans.
Are you saying the Republic are proposing a hard border on the island of Ireland?
No, they're not proposing that. They are, let's be honest, pissed off with their fellow countrymen going across the border to drink in Northern Irish pubs, as they were able to do until recently.
Well, this is exactly what was
south of the border.
This is what was going on in Bolton as well, which initially I understand, or was it Wigan, that didn't have the same lockdown as Manchester did. And so all of these taxi firms that were sort of based in central Manchester, that were suddenly put out of work by the lockdown restrictions, started offering discounted rates to ship people out of Manchester just outside of the restrictions, so they could all go and drink in those towns that weren't affected. And of course now they're under lockdown as well.
Are we reluctantly coming to the conclusion that alcohol is a factor in the spread of the virus?
Absolutely not.
Not at all. Not at all. But what I'm particularly,
I think we're going to have to admit it in the end.
You can admit all you want.
Alcohol doesn't spread corona. People spread corona.
But people have the alcohol. And look, I'm not keen on it either.
Yeah, unfortunately, I'm very aware that I'm going to finish Sober October, and by that point, London will have gone into Tier 3, and all the pubs will have bloody closed. But that's just my luck.
Oh, but no, it's fine. We're allowed alcohol in pubs, aren't we? With a substantial meal under Tier 3. It's like we've regressed to being
I don't even know
16-year-olds again.
Can we get off the pub and the corona subject? I mean, we've done it every week now. Let's move on to.
We have, because there has been substantive news. There is something going on Thursday and Friday in Brussels, and that is the European Council Summit. And this is the decision point, the pivotal point that Boris Johnson set out 3 or 4 weeks ago now, that says, you know what, if there isn't sufficient progress made by this summit, we are going and preparing full throttle for no deal. However, what we've been hearing, and particularly from people around David Frost, the chief negotiator, is that even though there's a lot of heat and noise in the media, a deal is actually incredibly close. There's only 2 real points of contrition left, and that's level playing field state aid provisions and fish. And I think that there's a path that a lot of people can see whereby this Conservative government accepts, hang on, we probably don't want to be doing a hell of a lot of state intervention, state aid anyway, and the EU relaxes their position on fish, recognising the UK as an independent coastal state. And you can sort of see that movement bringing together a deal that most people can be happy with, a Canada-style free trade agreement. And what the word around the negotiations is at the moment is that people in David Frost's team believe that can be achieved in the next 2 weeks. And that would be a very significant moment if what no one thought was possible, especially with the pandemic being the context of all of this, a free trade deal had been concluded in less than 11 months. That would be extraordinary. That would be a massive political moment.
I think it's more likely than not. I don't understand why the papers are so pessimistic. I think it's a misdirection, frankly.
Yes, one of the things that we ran this week was actually there's quite a movement building on the continent now, particularly of business leaders saying, guys, come on, this is close. It's not far away. You can both see how a deal could be reached. For the sake of jobs on the continent and businesses on the continent, you need to reach a deal. The leaders of the equivalent of the CBI, the big business representative bodies in Italy and France and Germany, signed a joint letter that we published on the site on Wednesday evening ahead of the council that was basically chivying the EU side along, saying, don't play games now, get a deal done.
Incidentally, for those of you who contacted me about the bets I made on Tom not becoming the spokesman should know that I've been betting very heavily on the deal being struck. So if you want to get your money on down the bookies, that's my tip. Another tip is don't go up against Darren Grimes. The police have had a sort of move to step down, and that was just after Starmer had sort of doubled down against Grimes over he should be prosecuted for was it incitement to racial hatred?
Yeah, I mean, this is it's just a mental policy position, because it wasn't just Starmer who spoke to LBC and as far as possible endorsed the police action against Starmer, saying it does sometimes have to involve the police, that a line can be crossed and it's important it can be investigated. This was following Carl Turner MP, who is a Hull MP, but also a shadow justice minister with Labour, who said freedom of speech doesn't afford people the freedom to make racist remarks. And let's just back up here. Even if you agree with that, it was not Darren who made the remarks. He was interviewing David Starkey, and the precedent it would set that interviewers cannot preside over something offensive being said by their interviewee for fear of arrest it boggles the mind. But it's not unsurprising, because Starmer has a history at the CPS of dragging people through the courts for offending people on Twitter. when he was director of public prosecutions, he dragged a man called Paul Chambers through the courts on the basis of a Twitter joke, cost him his job, hundreds of thousands, and eventually lost, thank goodness. But Starmer is not someone who can be trusted to defend basic human rights by the look of it.
Anyway, Starmer's timing was very off because the Met Police have emailed Darren and said that they are putting a senior officer to look into the proportionality of the investigation, by which I mean they're going to find it's disproportionate use of police resources and no further action will be required. Talking of which, no further action, can you believe that Ferrier, the SNP MP who travelled around like Plague Mary, the police decided not to do anything about her? That seems to be crazy.
It does seem extraordinary that not only that, but she continues to be an SNP member. She's been suspended from she's lost the whip. She's had the whip suspended from her in the House of Commons, but her membership of the party continues, which seems to be utterly, utterly extraordinary. It's quite interesting how the SNP have been found out a little bit about this week, actually, because Ferrier herself gave an interview to the Scottish Sun, which revealed a little bit more about the timeline of the course of events, i.e. she explained that she didn't write the statement that she put out to the press. That was written by SNP spin doctors. And one of the lines in that statement was, "I have reported myself to the police." So the SNP were chivying her to report herself to the police before they got the statement out, so the statement wouldn't directly lie. And the SNP told her, according to her in this interview in the Scottish Sun, the SNP told her that they would be able to contain this, that she would be able to continue. And yet they U-turned
we know this
an hour after it came out.
We know this because there's a growing salmon, sturgeon knife fight. Well, is that the right metaphor? There's certainly moves between them since she dropped him in it over the cover-up of the sexual assault allegations. She's obviously now suffering some blowback from Salmond manipulating this situation.
Absolutely. There has been counter-briefing and briefing at the top of the SNP, a party that has usually been pretty united, at least presented a united front, has not allowed much dissent internally, famously very top-down. And now you have these two big beasts of the party really at each other's throats. And this stemmed from an interview that Nicola Sturgeon gave to Sophie Ridge on Sunday, which we covered pretty extensively on the website. I note it took a long time for the BBC to cover it and some other news organisations to pick up on just how big this story was, because in it, Nicola Sturgeon read out texts that she had withheld from the Salmond inquiry and seemed to imply that Alex Salmond had told her to help her, had asked her to help cover up the sexual assault allegations that were made against him. And now that's pretty extraordinary either way. Either he didn't say that and she made it up just to dump him in it, and that's pretty extraordinary, or he did say that and she kept that quiet for months and months and months. A responsible First Minister, if someone has asked you to cover something up, would not cover up them asking you that. They would say, Alex Salmond has asked me to cover this up and I won't do that. The fact that she kept that under wraps for months is potentially pretty extraordinary.
The first rule of political scandals is it's always the cover-up that gets you.
Well, on that note, I think that's just about the rip-roaring tale through this week that we'll be providing for you today.
Well, as we talk, the second Shadow Cabinet Minister has resigned in one day. We've had Margaret Greenwood, a Shadow Schools Minister, resign over this intelligence bill and breaking the whip. So the Labour Party Shadow front bench is disintegrating in front of our eyes while we podcast.
What Keir Starmer was trying to do with this new position on calling for a circuit breaker lockdown was present some more opposition to the government so that potentially he could win some MP support for where he abstains on other government policy, which seems to be his default. But these whipped abstentions are really riling up his backbenchers. This is the second. I've heard wind that a third one might be coming, and maybe there's a bit of a move there. But what a way to end the podcast on. I suppose by the time people watch and listen, half the shadow cabinet might have gone. That's an exaggeration. That won't have happened. But Starmer's not exactly presiding over a happy party. Thanks for watching.
Bye.